Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. That day started like any other quiet Sunday morning in my house. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain, the kind that drizzles lazily, making everything outside look soft and peaceful. I was sitting by the kitchen window, reading the newspaper, when my grandson, Ethan, showed up earlier than usual. He's 21 now, in college, and usually comes by on weekends just to check on me or grab some of my homemade blueberry pie. But that morning, something in his face was different, gentler, maybe even nervous. He knocked softly before stepping in, though he's never needed to knock. "Grandma, you got a minute?" he asked, his voice low. I smiled, setting my cup down. "For you? Always." But even as I said it, I noticed his hands fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. That wasn't like him. He's usually cheerful, full of stories about his classes, his friends, his car that breaks down every other week. We sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking faintly between us. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of cars on the wet road. He stared at his hands, took a breath, and looked up. His eyes, those same gray eyes his mother had, seemed heavier than I'd ever seen them. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," he said, and even before he continued, I felt my heart stir with that strange mix of worry and tenderness only a grandparent knows. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and touched his hand lightly, letting him know he could speak freely. He hesitated, like he was trying to find the right words, the right doorway to let out what was clearly pressing inside him. "I haven't been doing great," he finally said. "I mean, not terrible, but just lost, I guess." I kept my eyes on him, waiting. He went on, his voice quiet but steady. He talked about how everything in his life felt uncertain, how he was studying something he didn't love, how his friends seemed to have everything figured out, and how he didn't know who he was supposed to be anymore. He said he'd been pretending for months that everything was fine, even with his parents. "But you," he said softly, "I knew I could tell you the truth." My throat tightened. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they're not okay. I told him I understood that kind of feeling, that I'd been there once, too. He looked at me with quiet surprise, like he couldn't imagine his grandmother ever being lost. So I shared a story I hadn't told anyone in years, about when I was his age, and how I almost gave up on something I truly loved because I thought it wasn't practical. How I used to lie awake at night, wondering if I'd ever find my place. As I spoke, I saw the tension in his shoulders ease a little. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming softly against the window, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. He was just a boy again, my little Ethan who used to chase fireflies in the backyard and fall asleep on the couch with a book half open on his chest. He smiled faintly and said, "You always make things sound easier, Grandma." I laughed gently. "It's not easier," I told him, "but it's survivable. That's the secret." When he left later that afternoon, the air felt lighter. He hugged me a little tighter than usual, whispered, "Thank you," and walked out into the drizzle. I watched him from the window, his figure disappearing down the street, and something in me swelled with quiet pride. It wasn't just that he trusted me. It was that he'd allowed me to see his heart at a time when the world often tells young people to hide it. And in that honesty, in that fragile moment between us, I saw something more than worry. I saw hope. That evening, as I sat alone with the fading sound of rain, I realized how moments like this, simple, real, unguarded, are what keep love alive between generations. They remind us that even when life feels uncertain, sharing our truth can bring light where we least expect it. And that day, my grandson's honesty didn't just touch my heart. It stayed there. The following week, I found myself thinking about that conversation more often than I expected. Every time I walked past the kitchen table, I could almost see him sitting there again. The way his shoulders slumped at first, the way his eyes slowly lifted with relief as he spoke. It made me realize how rarely we stop to truly listen, not just to the words, but to the quiet spaces between them. I decided to call him that Thursday evening. He answered right away, sounding brighter. "Hey, Grandma," he said, and I could hear the faint hum of music in the background. I was just finishing some reading. I asked how his week had been, and he told me he'd started journaling, something his professor had suggested, and that it was helping him sort through his thoughts. I smiled to myself. "You see," I said, "when you put your feelings on paper, they stop shouting in your head." He laughed lightly. "Yeah, I think you're right." We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about a new friend who shared his uncertainty, someone he could talk to without pretending. He spoke about wanting to travel after graduation, maybe volunteer somewhere before deciding what to do next. I could hear a faint excitement in his voice, fragile but growing. That spark reminded me of myself at his age, dreaming of places I'd never been brave enough to visit. After the call ended, I sat in the living room surrounded by the soft ticking of the clock and thought about how easy it is to lose ourselves trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. I wished someone had told me years ago that it's okay not to have everything figured out. Maybe that's why his honesty had reached me so deeply. It reminded me of the courage I once needed, but didn't always have. A few days later, he came by again, this time with his sleeves rolled up and his hair a little messy from the wind. "Grandma," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about survivable things." I smiled and motioned for him to sit down. He told me that he decided to change his major to something that actually made him happy, environmental design. He'd always loved sketching buildings and imagining spaces that felt alive. "Mom and Dad think I'm crazy," he said with a shrug, "but I can't fake it anymore." I looked at him for a long moment before replying. "You're not crazy," I said softly. "You're brave. There's a difference." He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for months. Then he reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "You're the only one who said that," he whispered. "Everyone else thinks I'm throwing my future away." My heart ached a little, not from sadness, but from the weight of love. "Ethan," I said gently, "sometimes people fear what they don't understand. They think safety is the same as happiness. But life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about finding what makes you feel alive." The room went quiet after that. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled through the curtains, painting the table in a warm golden hue. He nodded, eyes glistening, and for a brief second I saw the little boy he used to be, standing in my garden, clutching a handful of wildflowers, proudly declaring, "These are for you, Grandma." Before he left that evening, he hugged me again, longer this time. "You know," he said, "I don't think I could have told anyone else this. You just make it feel safe." After he drove away, I stayed by the window, watching the last traces of daylight fade. The world outside was quiet, but inside me, something felt renewed, a gentle peace that only comes when love turns into understanding. That night, as I turned off the lights and got ready for bed, I realized something simple yet profound. When someone opens their heart to you, it's not just trust, it's a gift. And the only way to honor that gift is to hold it with kindness, patience, and the promise to listen again when they need you most. A few weeks passed, and life slipped back into its gentle rhythm. Morning walks through the park, watering my plants, and chatting with neighbors over the fence. Yet, in the back of my mind, I kept replaying Ethan's words from that last visit. I wondered how he was managing with his new direction, how his parents had reacted, and whether he still carried that calm confidence he found at my kitchen table. One chilly afternoon, as the sky hung heavy with clouds, I received a message from him. "Grandma, can I come over tonight?" I really need to talk." The words stirred something in me, that mix of concern and a quiet readiness that only family can bring. I told him, of course, to come whenever he could. I baked an apple pie, just the way he liked it, with extra cinnamon, and set the kettle on. When he arrived, his face looked tired but not defeated. There was a storm behind his eyes, though he tried to hide it with a faint smile. "You always know when I need pie," he said softly as he hung his jacket by the door. I poured us tea, and for a moment we just sat in silence. The sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the room, steady and comforting. Finally, he sighed and said, "They didn't take it well, Grandma." He didn't have to explain who they were. His parents, my son and daughter-in-law, had always wanted a clear, predictable path for him. They loved him deeply, but their love often came wrapped in expectations. Dad said I'm wasting my potential. Ethan continued, his voice cracking slightly. Mom just looked disappointed. I thought they'd understand. I felt a deep ache for him. There are few things harder than feeling misunderstood by the people you love most. "They will," I said gently. "It just takes time for people to see beyond their fears. Parents sometimes forget that their children's happiness doesn't always look like their own." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I regret it later?" I took a moment before answering. "Ethan, every choice in life carries risk, even the ones that seem safe. But regret doesn't come from choosing your own path. It comes from never daring to try." He sat quietly for a long time, staring at the steam rising from his cup. The rain outside grew heavier, like the sky was echoing his thoughts. Then, in a trembling voice, he said something that caught me off guard. "You know, I told my professor about you. How you listen, how you never judge. He said everyone needs a person like that in their life." That simple sentence pierced my heart. I felt tears welling up, but blinked them away. "Well," I said with a shaky smile, "I guess I've done something right then." He smiled too, though faintly. "You've done everything right, Grandma. You're the reason I haven't given up." We talked for hours that evening, about courage, about failure, about what it really means to live honestly. He asked about my past again, and this time I told him more, about the risks I didn't take, the dreams I let fade because I was too afraid to disappoint others. He listened with that same quiet intensity, nodding slowly, as if every word meant something to him. When it was time for him to leave, he stood by the door, looking out into the rain. "You know," he said, "I think I understand you better now. You've been through all this before, haven't you?" I nodded. "In my own way, yes. That's why I know you'll be okay. You're already braver than I was." He hugged me tight, and for a moment the years between us disappeared, just two souls sharing a moment of truth in the soft glow of a kitchen light. After he left, I stood by the window again, watching the rain blur the streetlights. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but also lighter. That night, as I sat in bed, I thought about how honesty, raw and vulnerable, can heal not just the person who speaks it, but the one who hears it. Ethan's honesty had touched my heart the first time, but now it was shaping something even deeper. Understanding, trust, and a quiet bridge between generations that no disagreement could ever wash away. The seasons shifted almost unnoticed after that night. Winter arrived quietly, laying a soft blanket of snow across the garden outside my window. I'd often find myself sitting by the fire, thinking about how much Ethan had grown in such a short time. There was something profoundly humbling about watching a young person begin to understand themselves, that tender moment between doubt and courage when life starts to take shape in its truest form. He didn't visit as often once his new semester began, but whenever he called, his voice carried a steadier tone. He sounded lighter, more sure of who he was. One Saturday afternoon, he surprised me by showing up again, snowflakes melting in his hair, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma," he said, holding a rolled-up sketchbook under his arm, "I want to show you something." We settled at the kitchen table, the same spot where every meaningful talk had happened. He opened the sketchbook carefully, revealing pages filled with drawings, streets, parks, cozy rooms filled with sunlight. But what caught my breath were the details. The first sketch was of my kitchen, drawn from memory, down to the chipped corner of the window frame and the little ceramic bird sitting on the sill. "I wanted to start with the place where everything changed for me," he said softly. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Each page after that seemed to tell a quiet story, one of hope, rediscovery, and belonging. His lines weren't perfect, but they carried heart. "These are beautiful," I whispered. "You've captured more than spaces, Ethan. You've captured feelings." He smiled shyly, looking down. "That's kind of what I'm going for. I want to design spaces that feel like home to people, not just buildings, but memories you can live inside." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled in the background, casting a warm golden light that danced across his drawings. I thought about how far he had come from that uncertain young man who once sat here wondering who he was. And I realized that growth often looks quiet from the outside, but inside, it's a transformation as powerful as any storm. He told me that his professor had praised his new project and that slowly, even his parents were starting to come around. "Dad said he saw one of my designs online," he said, smiling faintly. He didn't admit it outright, but I think he's proud. I reached over and took his hand, feeling its warmth against my wrinkled fingers. "He is," I said. "Sometimes love just takes a while to find the right words." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You were right, Grandma. It was survivable." Hearing those words again, my own advice echoed back, filled me with something deep and quiet. Pride, yes, but also peace. Because in helping him find his way, I had rediscovered something in myself, a belief that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to trust in life's unfolding. That evening, before he left, we stood by the door looking out at the falling snow. "You know," he said with a smile, "someday, when I design my first real building, I'm naming one of the rooms after you." I laughed, shaking my head. "Just make sure it has good light and a window facing the morning sun." He grinned, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "Deal." Then he walked off into the snowy twilight, his figure fading into the pale glow of the streetlights. After he left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the snow drift gently across the yard. The world felt still, peaceful, and I realized that love doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the form of listening, of giving someone the space to be honest, and of believing in them until they learn to believe in themselves. That winter night, as the fire burned low and the house grew quiet, I thought about how honesty had once touched my heart and changed the course of his life. And maybe in some quiet, unseen way, it had changed mine too. Because sometimes the deepest connections aren't born from what we say, but from the moments we truly hear each other.